Following the partitioning of Vietnam in 1954, the Hanoi government turned its attention toward unifying the whole country under communism. The supporters of Hanoi's revolution, generally known as Viet Cong, set about gaining control of the peasantry by alternating propaganda and persuasion with terror and massacre. For 10 years, the United States provided a military assistance group to South Vietnam in hope of limiting U.S. involvement and defeating the Hanoi-backed insurgency. In August 1964, the stage was set for massive U.S. intervention. When North Vietnamese patrol craft attacked the U.S. destroyers Maddox and Turner Joy, President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered a retaliatory bombing of North Vietnamese targets, and Congress gave him a free hand to act militarily by passing the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. When the Viet Cong shelled an American barracks at Pleiku in South Vietnam in February of 1965, U.S. warplanes bombed North Vietnam and a steady, massive increase in U.S. ground, air, and naval forces began. By the end of 1965, 180,000 Americans were fighting in Vietnam. Another 50,000 served with U.S. carriers and supporting vessels in the South China Sea. By 1965, it was clear that the North Vietnamese supply route along the coast would have to be blocked. Accordingly, 7 Fleet cruisers and destroyers bombarded enemy positions near the coast, while U.S. naval and Coast Guard vessels joined the growing South Vietnamese Navy in Operation Market Time. The Market Time force used a variety of naval vessels and patrol aircraft to maintain a 24-hour watch over 1,000 miles of coastline. This operation denied the enemy a vital water infiltration route and slowed the supplies flowing from North Vietnam to a trickle. Operation Game Warden, an extension of Market Time, projected compelling power into the interlacing waterways of South Vietnam to prevent further communist infiltration and arms buildups in South Vietnam. It used U.S. river patrol boats and Seawolf helicopters to blockade known enemy crossing points, support commando and South Vietnamese provincial force operations, and protect the civilian population against the Viet Cong. The air war involved a bombing program known as Rolling Thunder, intended to bring the communists to the negotiating table. It was designed to block North Vietnam's lines of communications, destroy overland links with China, close North Vietnam's seaports, and restrike all previous targets as needed. Off the coast of South Vietnam, a single carrier operated at Dixie Station until enough land-based aircraft were available to take over support of maneuvers in the area. Newly arrived carrier pilots usually gained their first combat experience from Dixie Station before going to North roughly 2 million Vietnamese lives and 135 billion American dollars. While funds for naval building had been redirected to support the Vietnam War effort, the U.S. Navy had declined while the Soviet Navy had grown. The decline continued when Jimmy Carter became president. Determined to cut military spending, he initially rejected proposals for a Nimitz-class carrier. He changed his mind, however, after Iranian students stormed the American embassy on 4 November 1979, setting off a crisis that lasted until 20 January 1981, the day Ronald Reagan assumed the presidency. Maritime superiority became the goal of President Reagan and his spirited young Secretary of the Navy, John F. Lehman, Jr. The new secretary immediately set out to build a 600-ship Navy and develop U.S. maritime strategy centered around the large aircraft carrier. Touting the large carrier as his weapon of choice for a limited as well as nuclear war, Lehman scornfully neglected the small ship Navy. Satisfying Lehman's penchant for battleships, the Navy in 1986 deployed a battle group centered on the USS New Jersey. In 1987, while Lehman concentrated on building additional aircraft carriers and enlarging naval air power, the Iran-Iraq War impeded the efforts of smaller U.S. warships convoying oil tankers through the Persian Gulf. The first attack on U.S. naval vessels came on 17 May 1987, when an Iraqi jet mistook the frigate Stark for a tanker and struck it with 2 Exocet missiles. 37 American sailors died, but many more would have perished had not the damage control effort been so extraordinary and heroic. Floating mines became a prominent Iranian method of attack in the Persian Gulf. Using everything from Marines and SEALs to destroyer gunfire, the U.S. Navy began sinking mine layers and destroying old oil platforms used as a base of operations. Despite these preventative measures, the guided missile frigate Samuel B. Roberts struck a mine on 14 April 1988, nearly splitting the ship in half. Nevertheless, no lives were lost and the proficient crew saved the ship, proving the dramatic importance of continuous ship-wide damage control training. On 3 July 1988, Iranian gunboats engaged USS Vincennes, a guided missile frigate. While fighting the attackers, Vincennes' radar indicated an approaching aircraft descending toward it. Determining the aircraft to be aggressive, the Vincennes shot it down, only to discover it was an Iranian passenger plane with 290 civilians aboard. The long, detailed investigation of the tragic accident concluded only that the stress of combat made such tragedy inevitable. It proved that no matter how sophisticated the Navy's defense systems may be, people must make the final decisions based on the information provided. On 20 August 1988, the 8-year war between Iran and Iraq ended. Of the 270 merchant ships escorted by U.S. Navy vessels during the last 18 months of the war, only 1 incurred damage. By December 1988, U.S. naval operations were reduced to monitoring activities in the Persian Gulf. The end of the Iran-Iraq War did not bring peace to the region. By August 1990, Saddam Hussein had turned on neighboring Kuwait, making exorbitant demands despite the tiny emirate's generous support during the war. A meeting on August 2, 1990 to work out differences failed. The next day, Iraqi infantry and armored forces crossed the border to invade Kuwait. With its troops lining the border of Saudi Arabia and reinforcements continually arriving in Kuwait, Iraq was in a position to seize the Saudis' eastern province, giving Saddam Hussein control of most of the world's oil reserves, a prospect intolerable to the industrialized West and to Japan. Immediately condemning the invasion, President George Bush swiftly led the organization of an international coalition of forces to oppose Iraq's aggression and prevent its invasion of oil-rich Saudi Arabia. Led by the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, military planners hurriedly devised Operation Desert Shield to defend the Gulf and Saudi Arabia and to enforce economic sanctions. The hope was that economic sanctions against Iraq would persuade Saddam Hussein to remove his troops from Kuwait. But because this seemed unlikely, the coalition initiated a formidable military buildup in the Persian Gulf and surrounding areas. On August 8th, President Bush ordered the massive troop, aircraft, and ship deployment of Desert Shield. Within 8 hours of the order, maritime pre-positioning ships were steaming full speed toward the Middle East, loaded with supplies and equipment, while civilian crews quickly answered the call of the Ready Reserve. From the start, the coalition dominated the seas as well as all other areas of warfare. While land and carrier-based air forces weakened the Iraqi military and isolated Saddam Hussein, the Maritime Interception Force enforced the embargo. The coalition forces were successful in preventing the invasion of Saudi Arabia. However, Iraq defied the UN deadline of 15 January 1991 to withdraw from Kuwait. In the pre-dawn darkness of 17 January 1991, Operation Desert Storm struck Iraq with terrifying force. The roar of carrier and Air Force aircraft thundered across the waters while rockets and missiles streaked across the sky. In the first 2 days of attack, Navy ships and submarines launched a hailstorm of 216 Tomahawk missiles at designated Iraqi military targets. A-6 intruders hit Iraqi mine layers, coalition minesweepers cleared the waters, and U.S. service ships provided gunfire support and destroyed enemy-occupied oil platforms. U.S. Army and Marine Corps armor streamed across the desert, knocking out Iraqi elements wherever they found them. On April 11th, a stunned Iraq officially agreed to a ceasefire, and the UN Security Council declared the end of the war. The combined maritime and naval air campaign played a vital role in bringing a quick end to the conflict. Afterwards, U.S. ships stayed behind to search the skies and the sea for remaining hazards and to protect a volatile region from further threats. Desert Storm was the most dramatic illustration of how U.S. military power could be used in the post-Cold War era, which began with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1988 and 1989. The U.S. Navy's role was destined to become much more diversified than it had been in the 4 decades following World War II, when bipolar tension with the Soviet Union determined American military and naval strategy. While serving as a peacekeeper in countries such as Bosnia, Somalia, and Haiti, the post-Cold War U.S. Navy also assumed the role of policing the seas to help counter narcotic traffic. The post-Cold War era also brought the demise of the U.S. maritime strategy of deterrence centered around Reagan's 600-ship Navy. Without a Soviet Navy to justify this strategy, the need for a naval concept of command of the seas and battle fleet engagements was eliminated. Thus, in 1992, the Navy issued a new strategy, appropriately entitled From the Sea. Based on this strategy, the U.S. Navy would launch weapons from the sea against land-based targets. Its prime objective would be to protect areas bordering the oceans and major seas and to remain a prime promoter of democracy abroad. The new strategy was also devised to deal with the downsizing of the Navy mandated by President Bill Clinton and Congress. By 1994, a somewhat more sea-oriented strategy was resurrected entitled Forward from the Sea. Shifting slightly back towards emphasis on a blue water force, the Navy contended that it must maintain readiness for a full spectrum of missions and functions. Maintaining this strategy today, the United States Navy now engages in forward areas in situations short of war. Its objectives are to prevent conflicts and control crises with striking power built around aircraft carrier battle groups and amphibious-ready groups. The U.S. Navy's future holds promise of even greater technological advances than those of the 1990s. It's already making plans for a futuristic warship, which will be known as the Arsenal ship. Navy leaders envision it as a missile-laden, forward-deployed ship capable of instantaneously supporting forces ashore with a minimal crew. The Arsenal ship's potential utility was demonstrated suddenly in September 1996 when President Clinton ordered 2 sets of airstrikes against Iraq in retaliation for an invasion of British territory in the north and to preclude an Iraqi strike against U.S. and Allied forces in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. For the first time in memory, no American aircraft took part in the raid. It was conducted solely by cruise missiles, most of them launched from U.S. frigates and submarines. Never before had the aircraft carrier been denied a role in a major aerial attack on foreign land targets. The missile age of the U.S. Navy had dawned dramatically. The United States has come a long way since it first outfitted 2 wooden ships with 10 carriage guns to serve as a navy. And though we will enter the 21st century with the most technologically advanced Navy in history, we can expect continual evolutions of its vessels and its strategy to meet the demands of our ever-changing world.